I am so tired of the confusion, of the lack of clarity. I'm just tired of it. It's honestly gotten to that point. One of my main goals for 2025 is to strengthen my intuition, because I have started to notice the impact of not having a strengthened and well-developed intuition. If you're in the same position as me, you can probably relate to just knowing that when you don't have that connection to your intuition, the experience that you have on this life plane as a result of the decisions you make from having a poor connection to your intuition are just not it. They are just very subpar and they are very inferior experiences. When I consider the divine being that I am, the spirit that created all that is, lives within me, and I'm out here walking around just confused. It just doesn't make sense. I don't think this is the life that somebody as divine and as magical as I and as you are to be living like this. Do you think I don't think that makes sense. I think this is the year that we really figure this intuition thing out, that we really figure out this whole concept of being tapped into ourselves at a higher level so that we can operate at a higher level and experience life at a higher level. I know that a lot of people have, goals out here that they want to lose 25 pounds, make 5x amount of money. But honestly, I'm at a point where I just need to strengthen my intuition because of the impacts I realize not having that connection has on the experience that I have here. That's why I'm saying that one of my goals is to strengthen my intuition. And honestly, I would argue even just to develop my intuition, because what intuition? Like, let's be for real. What intuition do we have here? So in this regard, today I wanted to share a few things that I've noticed are some of the main culprits that get in the way and hinder or inhibit my ability personally to be connected to my intuition. And I'm definitely not coming from an angle of an expert in the sense that, these are the 5 things that you need to tap into to get in touch with your intuition, because did you hear what I just said? I'm not an expert on intuition, because what intuition, right? The whole purpose is that we're trying to develop it together, you and I. And if you're in the same position as me, raise your hand. It's okay. It's a safe place. As I started to reflect on, hey, this intuition thing, I want to work on it this year. These are the things that I noticed about myself are the main culprits that are getting in the way of me being able to be in connection with my intuition. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to share those things. I don't know how many of those things there are. That's why I can't tell you if it's 5 or 9. We'll see by the end of this video. But I will share today a couple of things that I notice get in the way of intuition. And I would love to hear you guys' thoughts on this. If you also have additional items that you've identified, or if there's one of them that resonates more or less with you, I would love to hear that. All right. So thing number 1 / the first culprit is indecisiveness. If you're like me, making decisions is just very, very hard. The idea of making decisions is overwhelming. It throws you into a frenzy. You just don't know what to do with yourself. Whenever you have to make decisions, if you're like me, just the concept of making decisions, it's just this very difficult, overwhelming thing. The way this looks can be a couple of ways. Either you are postponing decisions or delaying, putting them off. Maybe you just rely on other people a lot heavily whenever you have to make decisions. So you kind of want to get input from other people. Can't feel like you can make decisions until somebody has given you their input about certain things, especially the bigger the decision, then the more you need somebody to kind of give you just an inkling or just a nudge of where to go or what to do, especially when it regards bigger decisions of life. You just kind of need that confirmation or external validation from somebody to help give their input so that you can make your decision. Because that's the worst part. Oftentimes it's decisions for your own life, but then you need somebody else's input to do that. It's their confirmation is necessary for you to make a decision about your life, if you can relate. And then the other thing is just indecision, where you just don't make a decision. You don't say yes, you don't say no. There's just no decision made. And I want to talk about, this one's probably going to be the longest point, because there's a few things here that I notice as it regards to the issue of indecision. Indecision can be at the same time the cause of a lack of connection to our intuition, just as much as it is a result of a lack of connection to our intuition. Let me explain. So it's a result because obviously when you are disconnected from your inner guidance system, then what information or what guiding system or what basis or foundation do you have to refer to make decisions? You don't have one. There is nothing that you can refer to internally to make decisions. The other point is that it can cause us to be disconnected from our intuition. So when we don't make decisions, we are depriving ourselves from a lot of vital information that we would need to build to develop intuition. So if you're on a path, let's say one day you're going down a road and you say, okay, I don't know, there's two directions, I don't know where to go, I'm just exploring. And you just decide to say, I'm going to go left, whatever, I'm going to go west. You go west and you figure out that there's just like a bunch of danger, and somehow you survive this danger. You don't die, but you encountered so much danger on that road. And next time you're going down this road and you have to make a decision to go, east, west, left, right. You say, I'm not going there because down there was this going on last time I went, even though maybe things might have changed. But regardless, for your own safety, you won't be going there. You already know what's down there. Okay, you won't go because you now have new knowledge about this based off of a past decision you made. When we don't make decisions, we are depriving ourselves the opportunity of building up our inner storage of information. Whenever you make decisions in life, the consequences or the results of those decisions are vital information that you will hold forever and you can use forever to guide you in the future. You'll know next time, in a relationship, last time I made this type of decision in a relationship and this is what happened. So nowadays, at this age, we don't make those decisions no more because we've learned because of the result and whatever happened. But when we don't decide, when we are indecisive and we don't make decisions, or we don't make decisions for ourselves, so therefore, like, if there are consequences, it's not really like it was our fault. Or if you delay the decision making, again, you're just delaying the information that you can get. Also, one big thing for me in terms of decisions is that I think one of the overwhelming parts of decisions that I've always had ever since like I was a teen. Oh my goodness. If you go into like my yearbook for primary school, I'm literally the only person who has like a list with commas of things. Like, how you say what you want to be in the future? I'm literally the only one with like just a list of 1 billion things. It was just ridiculous. So the indecision has been like, it's been a struggle. That's why I'm saying 2025, like we need to fix this. And then going into high school, I just didn't know what I was going to do when I was going to go to university. And when I went to university too, I was still overwhelmed. I got into a few different programs because I applied to a few different programs. And then I ended up switching during my first year, like 3 different times. I had to take an extra year. Y'all, these are the consequences of indecision and being disconnected from your intuition. It just makes your journey take a lot of extra unnecessary time and turns and twists that if you were moving with intention and intuition and alignment, you probably wouldn't have to deal with all of that. So that's why, again, we need to handle this. But one thing I notice about that is that a lot of times it's like you feel like these decisions are permanent. You're scared that the moment I make this decision, it is irreversible. And that's not true. It's a lie, because most decisions are reversible, except maybe if you have a kid. Like at that point, it's like you have the kid, it's non-reversible. But even then, you can like put it up for adoption, I guess. You know what I mean? He doesn't have to stay with you for the rest of your life. But most decisions, they are not irreversible. Even if you're still stuck with it in some way, there are still ways you can modify it to fit you in a better way. It's never the end of the world. Like you can always pivot you can always change, you can always modify things. A lot of times the fear is that like this decision is it. It's like this lifelong commitment. Every time I think I'm making a decision, it's like I'm marrying this thing. It's like marriage. And that's a lie. That's a lie we tell ourselves. When I talk about inner storage, it's kind of like how a company can have a knowledge bank, which is this resource that has all this information that can be reused and easily accessible by everybody. So that's what making decisions can do for you. It can build this inner knowledge bank that can be a basis and a foundation for our intuition. All right, the last thing about indecision is that I once heard this amazing citation, and it is by somebody named Dana White. She started a blog about decluttering, and just her whole concept of clutter and just organization is very fascinating, like her approach. And so I would encourage you to go look into that if that's something you struggle with and want to look into. But in regards to clutter, she said that clutter is postponed decision making or something like that. I remember when she explained this on the podcast with Mel Robbins, I was like, OMG. This is so true, but it's not only true about physical clutter, it is so true as well about mental clutter. A lot of times our issue with not being able to fully declutter is that we do not make decisions about stuff. Half the stuff that we accumulate is just like being piled up over time because we cannot make a decision to say, okay, this I'm going to throw out, this I'm going to keep, this is not good anymore. It's kind of like, oh, maybe this, maybe, and there's just this like incomplete decision making around things. I remember even journaling about this. The thing is that when we don't make decisions, you're just building up mental clutter, because let's say you were thinking to pursue a project and you don't make the decision about it, and the project comes into your mind, and then you're like, do I do it? Do I not? You maybe even start researching about it, and then you leave it alone. Now, if you don't pursue it, but you didn't really make a decision, you didn't say, I choose to not pursue this project. I'm done. Like, I have other things to do. This is not the phase of my life right now. Made a decision that this is not it. This is great. I can write it down for future reference. Or maybe it's just not for me. Or maybe I'll try it in 2 years. It's a decision. But when you don't make a decision, that doesn't go away. It just stays in your mind. And oftentimes you continue to live with the remnants of that indecision. You carry it all the time. And so when you have this going on for so many things where you are not saying yes, you are not really saying no, you're constantly building up all of these unfinished, incomplete decision, incomplete thoughts in your mind. And this obviously will create a barrier and blockage to be able to connect with your intuition when you're full of clutter. Think about when your house is full of things or your room is full of things. It's really hard to then find something when you need it at the moment. Sometimes there's things that you have that maybe are valuable or that you can use or that can help you, but you don't even see them because they're just so covered with the clutter that you cannot even find them. And so it's the same thing with your mind. You can't even access certain information or certain details when there's just so much clutter due to not making decisions. And so the same way that you're not making decisions about physical things in your space, you're not making decisions about ideas, about people, about relationships, about projects, about dreams that you have. You're not making decisions about them. Those are just accumulating and accumulating over time. You obviously won't be able to find that still small voice, as they call it. Whether you call it intuition, discernment, we're just going to use the word intuition today. The next thing / culprit is silence. The world is such a noisy place, and it is the noisiest it's ever been. It's always been full of noise, but it is so noisy now with the advent of social media and just the internet. Obviously, everything has just gone crazy with this TikToks and the Instagrams. I feel like every new social media platform just makes the world noisier and noisier than it ever was. I know I'm not better. I'm over here on YouTube, but I feel like YouTube is it's a bit more mellow, you know? But either way, the world is noisy from the moment you open your eyes in the morning. I mean, from the moment you come out the womb, obviously you yourself are noisy, you're screaming, but the moment you open your eyes in the morning, it's just a blast of noise. Whether that's your phone notifications, the demands of your job, of your work, of family, of bills to be paid, of the stress of life, of just everything. There's just noise coming left, right, and center. I think at some point there was a bit more of balance in life to where maybe just, you had your TV, you had your family, but now it's just the world is so big. You have access to everything. You open your phone and you're accessing like Africa and Asia and Europe and all at once. Whereas before it was like, you just had the people down the street. Now it's a whole other level. It is so full of noise and a lot of negative noise too. That's the worst part. From the media to TV to social media, it's just everywhere. And like just the real life stressors. I think before there was limits, but now the demands of life, like even just the stress of life is just, there's noise around that. Before you could just be working your job and paying your bills, but now it's like there's just a whole other level of stress and there's just so much information. There's information overload. We're constantly consuming it, and oftentimes we're consuming things even unconsciously because there's always things in the background. There's ads everywhere you go. Your environment, whenever you walk into a space, there's just subtle information being thrown at you. Sometimes your conscious mind isn't picking up on it, but your unconscious mind is absorbing all of it. And sometimes you can walk into spaces and you're unconsciously absorbing just a lot of negativity, a lot of things and stuff that is just building up and piling up inside of you. In the day and age that we're living, you have to be extremely intentional about getting quiet. If you're not, then the default is noise. And it's impossible that noise will not eventually begin to infiltrate inside of you, and oftentimes without even you noticing. It's gotten to a point where people are adopting schools of thought, they're adopting perspectives, they're even shifting and adopting core beliefs about themselves, about relationships, about a group of people based off of the information that they're absorbing. I think in past years, we have been able to see just like movements and things happen just from people absorbing information. One example is like these constant gender wars, that are always happening, especially within the Black community, where it's just like men this, women that. And now you see this whole new generation of women who are adopting the school of thought around whatever their role and men's role is, men adopting a school of thought. And then these schools of thought are like influencing how they enter into interaction and connection and engagement with a certain group of people. Oftentimes, if you consider before they ever even consumed all this information, they were not even about this perspective. A lot of people didn't even consider half of these things that they're considering nowadays about men and women and all this stuff, until all of this stuff just became so prominent and in our face. It's really almost impossible that as you consume this, that it's not going to infiltrate your system and actually even shift like core aspects, core beliefs of what you see and believe about the world around you and people. And the worst part is that a lot of this information is good. I saw a video and it was, I wish I could stitch this if I can find it, but it was this lady and she was just like me trying to get my life together on social media or something like that. And then it was just a compilation of all these videos that were constantly contradicting each other, all with good information though. And that's the thing, is you can be absorbing lots of good information, but it's just not information that is maybe even necessary for you, or it's just getting to a point that it's not even effective for you anymore anyways, because our brains have limited capacity. Like, you need to consider that you can only take in so much. And oftentimes, like I said, what happens is you're obviously limited consciously to what you can intake. So a lot of it gets filtered through unconsciously, and you're just absorbing this. Before you know it, you have a whole perspective, a whole core belief, a whole school of thought that literally guides you in your behavior and guides your perspective on life without you realizing, and guides your entire energy too, which is really important. You start to move and you start to carry a whole different energy about yourself and life just because you've changed these core beliefs. It can get to the point where we are dependent on the information that we are receiving, or deferring our thinking process and our ability to think, even our ability to process things and our ability to have perspective. We are literally outsourcing that to these information sources to tell us what to think, to tell us how to see things. I really feel like it's gotten to that point because like people latch on to stuff all the time based off of what we're seeing online. And oftentimes we look to these informations to guide us, like, you know, tell me how I should move as a woman. Whereas if you are in tune with your intuition, especially as a woman, there will be a way that you will move that will be unique to you and nobody else. Same thing as men. You might think like, oh, I'm going to walk like that man walks because he's the man and he looks like this. Whereas if you were in tune with yourself, you had that intuition, you would have your own way. Maybe it would be quirky, maybe it would be calm, maybe it would be like mellow, maybe it would be energetic, regardless, but it would be yours, and people would be drawn to that just because of the fact that it is so authentic and it is so unique and it is so you. But oftentimes what happens with all of this mass information that we're constantly taking on is we end up almost depending on it to even just show us how to move. And that's, I feel, where a lot of us are getting at, especially even relationships. Like, we're looking for signs, we're looking for information out there to tell us what a proper relationship looks like, what, you know, behavior, what red flags, what is this, what is that. And it's a lot. It's gone to the point where I feel like we're almost misusing and misplacing this very valuable era that we're all living in, this information era, this information age, where we have access to information easily and at such a large scale, but we're misusing it to the point where it's almost controlling us. And a lot of the stuff that we see out there is mainly focused on tapping into people's insecurities. It's so unhealthy, but we're not going to go down that path today. That's not what we're doing. And that's why I always say you need to really be grounded in yourself to be able to be absorbing information so much, because you need to be able to draw the line at some point. Like, there are people who, for me, are amazing, but I know at which point I draw the line of getting information. That's one thing I can do well, but I still outsource a lot of, like, you know, I want information out there to tell me, you know, how to move in certain scenarios. I still use that, but I do know that I don't ever follow somebody to the point where everything they do, everything they say is Bible. But there are people who will do that for anybody. You need to have a certain level of being grounded in yourself before you can start absorbing so much information. Otherwise, you will just be this caricature of blended things that you've absorbed everywhere that is just not even really you, but just a combination of random stuff. I guess that goes back to clutter too. The next thing or culprit is stop lying to yourself. Have you ever had the experience where you were in a scenario with a person, a situation, whatever it might be, and something just felt off about the person, the place, the company, the situation, the scenario, but despite that feeling, that strong sensation that came up, you decided to bypass, to ignore that feeling, and you move forward, or vice versa. Maybe you told yourself to move forward and then you didn't. And later down the line, lo and behold, you find yourself saying, gosh, I knew it. By raise of hands, let me know if you've ever been in that situation. Again, it's a safe space. Cool. All right, we need to learn to tell ourselves the truth. Oftentimes, we can get caught up in lying to ourselves. The main thing here is really just self-honesty. Sometimes we know the truth. We just tell ourselves a lie to be able to move forward. We gaslight ourselves before anyone else gaslights us. We do things that we feel is against whatever internal feeling. And the more you do this, the more disconnected you become from your intuition, because your gut feeling oftentimes is literally your inner guidance system. It is a big part of your intuition, or literally I would say is. And so the more you shove that away in scenarios, and of course we will get disconnected from our intuition. And so overall, just trusting your inner voice is very important to strengthening our intuitive abilities. Stop lying to yourself, focus on self-honesty. Again, I'm saying this because I'm the first one who does that to myself. Sometimes you find ways to convince yourself to rationalize yourself out of a truth that you know. The more you do that, then the more your intuition will get weakened. No doubt. And I know they say it's like you have to be a little bit careful when it comes to, things like your gut feelings, because sometimes it could be your trauma if you're not careful. However, we have to consider that there are different planes of existence. Like I said earlier, we are divine beings, we're spiritual beings, and oftentimes that part of ourselves that is beyond this physical plane can see things, can hear things, can detect things that we don't detect in our 3D, in our fleshly world. And so that's just a reality. I know that there's the reality of confirmation bias, of, you think something and then it happens and you're like, oh geez, I knew it. And then it's just like confirmation bias, and you're always confirming that people abandon you or whatever. But there's also the idea that there are pure scenarios in which it's nothing to do with your background, but everything to do with this deeper part of you that connects beyond what you see in reality. The next thing / culprit is vulnerability / emotional intelligence / connection to emotions. So a lot of us who grew up obviously in Black households, Caribbean households, whatever, African households, we weren't taught this whole concept of emotions. I think a lot of us grew up in ways where we weren't taught, if you're sad, just there's certain emotions that we couldn't really tap into, right? If anything, as a kid, some parents really stifled their children's ability to express emotions. You always had to kind of present yourself in a way that, made whatever adult in your life feel comfortable, and that usually meant not showing up with any uncomfortable emotions. Long story short, a lot of us, don't have that natural tendency to have emotional expression or to be tapped into our emotions. And our emotions are a whole gateway into our inner worlds. So when we don't allow ourselves or learn to connect with our emotions, we are literally just throwing away, discarding a whole resource, a wealth of information about ourselves. Because so long as you're human on this earth, from the day you were born and from your childhood, you have had emotions. You can think you don't have emotions because you come off as maybe this tough cookie, but regardless, if you're human, you live on this earth, you have an emotional world that sometimes, if you haven't allowed yourself, I'm the first one who has been trying to figure this part out myself. Even in therapy, my therapist will be like, what was the feeling or the emotion you felt? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, what is this question? Like, I was sad. And she's like, okay, but like trying to elaborate on the feeling and the emotion. And I'm like, I don't understand what you're asking me to say right now. And it's just, I don't know. And I feel like as I'm getting older as a woman, you just get more and more emotional. Like, you get very sensitive. I don't know if it's just the weight of everything, the weight of the patriarchy or whatever it might be, especially as a Black woman. It could be these hormones too, child, because, oh my goodness. The more you grow, I just realizing that I'm emotional. My birthday, my dad sent me a voice note blessing me and praying for me. But this time it was like, oh, thank you. You're just so amazing as a father. But all that to say is that tapping into your emotional world is literally accessing a world of information about yourself. You can pretend or think that you don't have emotions because you maybe come off a certain way, you come off as tough, but that toughness is probably just compensating or masking for, deeper issues that are going on. Because again, maybe you might have, let's say, daddy issues, mommy issues, abandonment issues, whatever. I'm not a psychologist, and I'm not here to diagnose anybody or to talk about these topics. That's not the purpose of this. However, you might be carrying, a load of certain things, and just because of the way you carry it, you come off as tough, you come off as, unemotional. That in and of itself can be just a coping mechanism or a way for you to compensate for whatever else is going on, which is the deeper abandonment issue. So, if I show up as tough, then nobody's going to be able to break me before I break them or something like that. So you just, show up that way, but that doesn't mean you're not emotional. In fact, I would argue that people who suppress their emotions are even more emotional than people who come off as emotional, I guess. But regardless, it's It's a coping mechanism. All that to say is that emotions are our wealth of information, and when we don't allow ourselves to tap into our emotional world, we are literally denying and depriving ourselves from a world of information about ourselves. Because as long as you're on this earth as a human being, from the moment you were a child until you've grown now, you have gone through experiences and you have emotions living inside of you. Either you tap into them and figure them out and dig into your emotional world and figure out what's there because it's already there, or you kind of shove it away. And what happens is you move and operate in life in a way that might compensate for you lacking that emotional connection or that knowledge or information about yourself. And when you do that, you do it unconsciously, and you do it in a way that usually is not serving you, but is instead harming and working against you. Not being tapped into our emotions is very much strongly related to not being in touch with our intuition as well. And just again, I want to reiterate that your emotions are there, right? Whether you tap into them or not, whether you think you have emotions or not, they're there. Oftentimes we have just suppressed so much that we just don't have access to that. And it's information about you. Like, your emotional world is literally all about you. It's your information about you from literally from infancy, from childhood, that is inside of you that you just haven't allowed yourself to access, or you don't access on a regular basis. And so it's really important to be able to tap into that part of you. The next culprit is a lack of reflection, which kind of goes back to being silent. But if we don't revise what we've done, what has happened, how it's made us feel, if we don't take an assessment of things, if you think about how companies operate, companies have to have audits. They need to conduct like reporting regularly, if they do it quarterly, annually, whatever. They need to be able to have these audits and publish these reports that can showcase what's been going on. And that can better help companies, especially if they do it well and efficiently, to have an accurate assessment of, where they stand in terms of resources, what bottlenecks exist, what they are doing, in this current season, what needs to be fixed for the future season, etc. And so in our own lives, oftentimes we are not taking time to reflect, to take consensus, to assess, to audit what is happening, what is going on, to take account of where we are, even right now in this very moment. Again, I am guilty of this. Like we kind of mentioned this in the decision part, is that you need to be able to reflect and say, oh, I've made these choices in the past and this is what resulted, or I've done this and this is what resulted. And so again, it creates that knowledge base to be able to inform you to make better decisions. But there needs to be assessment about what's going on now, what has happened. And oftentimes we don't really do things like that. We're kind of just moving along, or maybe we might reflect on one thing, but we don't really reflect on, other aspects. Just like a company is able to identify a bottleneck in our lives, if we reflect efficiently, it can help us to identify things that are bottlenecks as well in our lives that aren't working, that we need to fix, that we need to correct, etc. And so sometimes you might be out here thinking that one issue is your problem. You need to be making more money, hustling, and in reality, you need to be fixing, those spending habits, or you need to be fixing some of those core beliefs that you might have, or something like that. But you're over here working on trying to hustle more or trying to lose weight, but in reality, you need to focus on this. When you assess and you reflect, you can have like better, accurate information to inform yourself. Again, that helps us strengthen our intuition. But oftentimes we don't be out here reflecting like we should, and that's a problem we need to fix. In 2025, we need to be able to reflect more. That can help us when it comes to the whole concept of intuition. The next culprit / thing is not prioritizing yourself and your needs. If you're anything like me, a very seasoned professional people pleaser, somebody who is afraid of rubbing others the wrong way, somebody who is afraid of the impact that your decisions, even if they're good for you, would have on others. Somebody who considers how people feel and think and try to appease them. If your presence rubs them the wrong way, you try to dim yourself to make them feel better about themselves and whatever they got going on. Or if you are also not necessarily pleasing others, but you just don't prioritize yourself. Maybe you're just so busy with life and you're just out here rushing and going from one thing to the other, surviving and just toughing life out, roughing it out, because there's so much to do, so much to get done, to where your needs and just yourself as a person are not prioritized. If that applies to you, I'd like to see you raise your hand. Okay. This is something we need to fix, my lovelies. I think a lot of times we can get caught up, especially with ambitious pursuits. There's a lot to do in this life, absolutely. But in the light of what we think we're doing that is bringing us and propelling us forward. And it's very virtuous and it's really positive because, if you're working and you're doing things and you're building and striving, those are all good things. But sometimes that can come at the cost of us deprioritizing ourselves and decentering ourselves from our own life as we pursue all these things. And also, again, mix it in with that people pleasing, and you just got a really horrible equation here. When we understand our needs and we prioritize ourselves and our needs in our own life, because the person that needs to be prioritized in your life is you. That's regardless if you got kids, regardless if you got parents. Only when you prioritize yourself will you actually be able to even care and love and give to others in a healthy way anyways. Don't even try to act like when you are, sacrificing your needs and just sacrificing yourself in general for others, that this is such an amazing and virtuous thing, because it is not. If you are harming yourself by putting yourself on the back burner and just ignoring your needs, there's nothing virtuous about that. And whatever you're giving to people is coming from an inferior place within yourself that usually won't even allow you to give in a way that is enriching either your life or that person. Constantly putting other people's needs above our own can eventually cloud our own judgment, because you're not using your own information as a knowledge base. You're being driven by someone else's needs. You're being driven by something else out there in the world. And so eventually that will just overpower. It'll just take precedence over it. It'll be more important. And so you won't even have the ability or the space or the room to consider whatever is inside. When we prioritize and learn our needs, obviously, we're able to move in life in a way that aligns with those needs. Similarly to emotions, when you actually tap into your needs, you're tapping into a world of information. So oftentimes, we just don't have access to these things because we are just ignorant. And so sometimes you are deprived of that information because you literally have no knowledge of what it is you need in any season. And other times as well, we just don't give it importance. It's important. Our needs matter and they should be priority in our lives. Similarly to understanding bottlenecks in our earlier example, when you actually know what you need, you can make decisions based off of information that's relevant to you, rather than, again, just moving in a way that just based off of what you're told out in there in the world, based off of traditionally what might matter, culturally what might matter. When you know what your needs are, you can make aligned decisions that are relevant to you and that are relevant to you in any season, because again, your needs might evolve, your needs might change. And when you're actually able to prioritize ourselves, you can say, oh, this is what I need in this season. This is what I need in this moment. So yeah. That's something else that I noticed, is not prioritizing myself, not prioritizing my needs. It definitely hampers on that intuitive connection. The next point and thing is safety. This is probably one of the biggest ones and probably relates to everything I'm talking about here. And it's not my last point, but regardless, when I think about it, the opposite of security is actually fear. Because when we are not safe and we are insecure within ourselves, we become just afraid of everything, afraid of being abandoned, afraid of being let down, afraid of being rejected, afraid of not being enough. We just become afraid. The moment you don't feel safe. I remember one time I witnessed this really scary thing that happened, like a crime, and I couldn't sleep for days. I became so scared. I was triggered, and it was just fear because I didn't feel safe. So the opposite of security, I guess, is insecurity, but insecurity is really just fear when you think about it. So when you're not safe, you're fearful. You're fearful of everything. So what's my point about this is that when you are operating, obviously, from an internally insecure place, and again, these are reflections I've made about myself, okay? Not saying that your girl doesn't believe in herself or doesn't have confidence. However, internal safety and security can mean a lot of things. And when you don't have that, especially, again, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not here to diagnose people, especially when you've been raised in environments that were not stable, or you just had an unstable upbringing due to a lot of things. Maybe you moved around. It could be a lot of things. Maybe you had a parent that was constantly in and out. So it can be a lot of ways that have kind of built in within you this internal instability or insecurity, I should say. And what happens is that when we are operating from a place of fear, this fear takes over. It's the fear that is running the show. It's the fear that is making decisions. It's the fear that is not making decisions. It's the fear that is postponing decisions. It's the fear that is causing us to lie to ourselves. It's the fear that is causing us to not tap into our emotions. It's just fear all across the board. Essentially, safety is a necessary foundation for being connected to your intuition. The moment there is no safety and security, there's just fear. And fear is such a strong sensation, feeling, or whatever. It is such a powerful energy that at that point it becomes hard to tap into any type of knowledge or intuition or anything like that, even if it's within you, because the fear will take precedence and it will be overpowering. Operating from a place of fear suppresses our intuitive insights in all capacities. If you go back to all the other things we've talked about, from decisions to everything, the moment fear is there, there's no room for you to let's tap into emotion, let's reflect, let's make a decision. Like, you're just scared. Everything is just scary. And I remember in that era when I witnessed that crime, everything was scary. Like, going to bed was scary. It got to this irrational point where at night I was just like, I felt like I had to have something to protect myself, because people that were completely unrelated to me, I just witnessed something outside, but it had traumatized me so much that, like, going to bed, I had to sleep with my mom. At the time I was living at home, I had to sleep with my mom in her bed for like months. The fear was irrational. And that's what fear is. It is irrational. And it guides you to the point of like, this is what you can do or what you can't do based off of that fear. Not knowledge, not your internal world, not past information or your knowledge bank. No, it just guides you based off of the fear itself. Safety is a big one. Internal safety is a big one. If you can identify with me to where you might think that there's fear running the show here, that there is probably this internal instability and insecurity. And I know people don't like the word insecure because it makes them feel like, you're like this low person. I'm pretty confident in myself in many ways. Like, I don't have problems speaking in public. I don't have a problem, connecting with people and strangers. I've started projects. I've done things. I've done a lot of amazing, interesting things. I've traveled across the world alone. In many respects, I believe in myself. I like myself. So I just feel like sometimes when people hear the word insecure, it's like you think you're ugly and you just think you're this low inferior person and you have this really low self-concept, but it can look so many different ways. You can still be unstable and insecure within yourself while still having a lot of positive perspective about who you are as a person. Creating a sense of internal safety and security enables you to trust and act upon your intuition without hesitation. And that's the biggest thing, is that fear creates like a lot of hesitation within us, to where, again, we don't make decisions, we don't move forward, we don't do things that will help us or that will serve us. It just creates this big barrier for us. So that's the main thing on safety. All right, the next thing is expression. I know it might sound contradictory because I just said I can talk to people in public. I can talk to strangers. I go everywhere around the world. However, I'm going to ask again, if you've ever been in this scenario where I have been. I pretty fine getting into like arguments with like my siblings or something like that at home. However, when I find that like I'm in public or in certain other scenarios, even in other intimate relationships, I have found that like I have this issue with, especially when it's kind of these uncomfortable subjects or things that need to be addressed, I find that I can adopt that whole like fight, flight, freeze, fawn or whatever response. At home with my siblings, it's like, no, you gonna get it, like blah, blah, blah. But like out here in the world, it's like, and so I remember one time this colleague, I was working part-time when I was in school, and this colleague of mine like said something really inappropriate, and I remember that day I was just like, that's it. Because he was like this French guy, and he had like this tendency to kind of make these off-putting comments sometimes, and I would kind of brush it off. And I remember that day I was like, that's it. Like, I don't know what he said. I can't remember. And that's my problem as well sometimes, is that because when you shove things down and you don't address them, later down the line, you don't even remember what happened. Like, whereas if you had addressed it, you would have remembered whatever interaction you had about that thing. But sometimes when you don't express things, you just accumulate all this anger and resentment. And then sometimes even the person will be like, well, what did I do? And you're like, I can't even remember, because in the moment I didn't address it, but the things that I have addressed, like in past relationships, anything that I have addressed, I remember one person that I knew tried to gaslight me once and be like, oh, you never even said this or whatever. And I was like, no. I had multiple discussions with you about this. But I think when we don't express, it can contribute to like, just forgetfulness. But sidebar. So that day I remember I was like, I'm going to stand up for myself today, But your girl was shaking in her boots. I don't even remember what I was saying, but all I remember is my voice was shaking and my supervisor was just there looking at me like, girl. Which also, like, why weren't you helping me, Miss Supervisor? That's besides the point. I remember that even the guy was looking at me like, girl, sit down, okay? It was a hot mess. I think both my supervisor and him probably had to talk after to be like, dang, that was weird. But it just came from the fact of me being so uncomfortable with expressing myself, especially when it concerns like something that is just like uncomfortable and it's not pleasant. Me having to be firm and just advocate for myself and put somebody in their place because sometimes it's necessary to do so. It's something that freaks me out. Having to have conflict with people that I barely know in public, it just freaks me out. I will be shaking in my boots, right? I always admire people who can do that. Not expressing authentically and suppressing your own authentic self-expression, from what I can see on my experience, definitely is hampering on our ability to connect with our intuitions. We need to fix this. Even if it's making other people uncomfortable, even if it's being the bad guy in a situation or whatever else, we need to work on having that authentic self-expression. Especially now as women, we're being told we need to be like soft and like talk like this. I'm not telling y'all to go out here on rage fits. However, being firm and practicing standing up for yourself, even if you look absolutely ridiculous, like I did that day in the office, even if it's just doing it that way. I don't know if you've, like me, and you've had that type of scenario, or maybe you never even had that scenario because you never even got to the point of trying to stand up for yourself in a scenario. But it is very, very important for us to learn how to have that authentic self-expression, because especially as women, like I said, sometimes we're taught these superficial things to the point where it actually stifles our own self-expression, because we know we can only be pleasant and we can only address things in a certain graceful way, and not every moment is called for gracefulness, and we need to be authentic about how we express ourselves in order to have that flow of intuition, because a lot of intuition is just a question of blockages and an inner tension. I find a lot of the stuff that I've shared today, whether it's the fear, whether it's this and not expressing ourselves, it just creates inner tension. And so it's hard for intuition, which is like a flowing energy, to be able to have room to flow and to move when there's just tension and tightness that is just piled up internally. Overall, expressing your thoughts, your feelings truthfully, not shoving them down, allows your intuition to guide you more effectively, as you'll be in tune with your genuine self, not a fake, graceful version of yourself. And the last thing I'll say is, I'll start off with the statement I made at the beginning, is just our spirituality and our divinity. We are on a physical plane, and as we live here on this physical plane, we get really caught up in the physical, in the 3D, what we see, what we feel, what we touch, what we hear, what we taste, what we smell. Whether you're Christian or you have other beliefs, there is a whole other plane of existence. If you think about just the magic and craziness of your dreams every night, you just get transported into this whole other place. Like, I've had experiences in my life where I've had dreams and I didn't understand at the time. Like the traumatic experience I explained earlier when I witnessed a crime, I had literally dreamt just days before the whole scene breaking out. It wasn't obviously exactly like that. It was more like a military thing, but it was crazy. I remember the realization I had later on after everything diffused, where I was like, oh my God, the dream that I had when I woke up scared and freaking out and like shaking, that it just happened. This is crazy. And it wasn't the first time I've had dreams where like people kind of did me wrong, and then later on I understood that that was what the dream was saying. So your spiritual and divine self is beyond 3D. It's beyond time, space, all of these constraints that we have. Our spiritual beings, our spiritual selves is where we will be able to tap into the reservoir of our intuition. But I would say spirituality is so important to gain that intuition, to gain that discernment. Otherwise, you're literally, first of all, discarding a whole entire part of yourself. You are dual in nature. You are spirit and you are flesh. And so you're completely ignoring a part of yourself. And that part of yourself is, I would say, the foundational part of yourself. It is your inner self. And so that's where your intuition will come from. If you're not meditating, getting silent, praying, really tapping into your spiritual practices, even fasting. I've had long-term fasts that I've done that just, man, fasting is something, but I won't get into that today. And so a lot of different spiritual practices that you can take on that can help you tap into that intuition. I know for me, again, being a busybody, somebody who's out and about, who's extroverted, it's been a struggle for me to really keep that connection to my spiritual practices, to stay connected, read my word, and do all of these different practices that really help me to build my spirit man up. It's definitely something that I don't do enough. And when I've done certain spiritual practices, it's it's crazy how in tune I became with the flow of my own life and my journey in a way that felt almost supernatural at times. Sometimes we're out here going crazy doing the most when just operating from our inner spiritual beings would make so much align much more easily without the crazy hustle and bustle and effort that we tend to be doing to try to get results. Those were the things. I don't know if they're 9 or 10, but those were the total things that I have noticed hamper on my ability to connect with my intuition. I wanted to know what you thought about these. Do you relate? Do you have other aspects that you've noticed block you from being connected to your intuition? I would love to hear your thoughts, and I want to know if you want to join me on this journey as well to develop and strengthen and maintain a deep connection to your intuition. I really want to get this intuition thing right. The crazy part is I was hoping to add self-awareness, but in reality, I'm very aware of who I am. I know my strengths. I know my core values. I know my mission and what I'm here to do. I know my approach and my perspective on life and the core philosophies that I have. I know about that, especially like as it regards to spirituality and things like that. I'm very grounded in those. However, despite that, this connection to my inner self is hampered by all these things that I've mentioned. It was crazy because I was like, maybe self-awareness is one, but I was like, I'd be just adding that as like a vanity thing to add to the list for no reason at all. It's crazy to think about how we navigate life, and we go to school, we go through a whole education system, and we're just never taught a lot of these very intangible but very vital and foundational things that literally have the biggest impact on our lives. Not being taught how to make decisions, not being taught emotional intelligence and like how to understand and even explore and even identify your emotions. Like I was explaining to you about my situation with my therapist, how to feel and how to operate in the world from a place of safety. You know, you can go to school and have all the most fancy degrees in the world, but if these foundational core elements are in a problematic state, like if you're unsafe internally and you have issues around making decisions, then all of that won't even matter because most of it will just end up being sabotaged, you know, and that's why we see people who have lovely success and then just like things go down the drain because poor decisions, because insecurity that they're operating in and bad core beliefs, because of poor emotional health, just a lot of the reasons we just spoke about. But seriously, don't you find it crazy that we don't get taught these things? It's wild. And I think I'll end on that note, and I invite you to share your thoughts. I would love to hear what you think. Here's to strengthening our intuition in 2025 and hopefully to the better outcomes that will come from that.